So the topic for the week, as it is most weeks, it seems, is PFAS. We've kind of a couple things that happened. One, let me share the screen. You guys probably saw this, of course, in the Globe.
Oh, yeah.
It's worth mentioning the PFAS found in the Anvil 10+10. So it was a interesting thing. We've been, as indicated in the Globe article, it had come to our attention by a peer. I forget what, public employees for environmental responsibility peer. They had done some limited testing and brought it to our attention, and so we looked into it and tested the original material, tested material out of the tanks from the planes that were spraying. That was early on, working with the manufacturer to try to find where it's coming from. Overall, I thought it was a pretty good kind of informative article, but it does kind of really highlight some of the problems of PFAS in that we use the term ubiquitous for it so much, and it's not necessarily ubiquitous in the environment. I want to keep reinforcing that we have a lot of non-detects out there in groundwater samples, in drinking water samples. So it's not in everything we're drinking, we're using in the environment, but it's certainly in a lot of the consumer products that are being used, and they are very useful materials, have been very useful materials, and as such have found their ways into many things. And when you're looking at the nanogram per liter or nanogram per kilogram levels, it's not surprising that you find some low levels. So I would just kind of reinforce reading articles like this to try to put it all in perspective.
Do you know what the concentration is, what is sprayed? I've seen the data for what is in the sort of the raw material. Is that diluted before it's sprayed, or is it?
I believe it's both diluted before it's sprayed, and then, of course, spraying it then results in dilution as well. So as the article indicated, our Mark Smith and our Office of Research and Standards has been taking the lead and working on this. And if you do go through kind of the typical 21E type of risk assessment, and which is risk assessment, it's not unique to our program, and look at kind of how much it's sprayed over what area, and volumes, and if it's sprayed over water supplies, which is one of the things we're looking at, kind of what would be the expected levels. And as Mark indicated in the article, you would expect on non-detect based on all of that. And I think one of the things the article didn't get into is, of course, we are doing a lot of testing of the water supplies, not only in the Southeast where this was sprayed, but across the state. DEP is paying for, or the legislature is paying for, at least one round of public water supply testing for every water supply in the state. So we're looking at this from both directions, of course. One is it, what is the effect of spraying, but also, are we seeing any impacts, whether it's from spraying or other sources? So.
Well, do you have a message from Wendy? Trying to let her in.
Oh, no, but I can admit all. Liz, can you also keep an eye on that? I have it up. I have the waiting room up. Actually, let me just get rid of the waiting room. There.
That's my fault. I completely got distracted.
No, I had it. I get distracted talking. Sorry, Wendy. She should be in by now. We didn't mean to leave you and others hanging in the waiting room.
How do you think they did on risk communication in the article? How do you think they did on communicating the whole risk issue?
First, I hesitate to. I would seek your opinions. We people from DEP had spoken with David Abel, in preparation for this article, obviously. But at some point, it's my feeling that, I'm a biased, as being part of DEP and being a regulator, I understand that I read articles like this and I have a sort of bias going into it. And so I would be interested in your perspectives on kind of how well the risks were communicated. Needless to say, it's not the way I would have written the article, but I'm not a member of the press. I have my own certain biases, so that's not surprising. That's not news that I wouldn't have written it that way. So I'd be actually.
I guess my point is, in fact, it seems like news articles.
Matt, your audio is sounding like a piano, badly tuned.
I apologize.
Yeah, maybe
Too bad.
Maybe we'll try somebody else first. Anybody else?
I was left out at the beginning. And what is the article you're talking about?
Oh, I'm sorry, Elliot. Oh, we're talking about the Boston Globe article from a couple days ago, December 1st, on the discovery of PFAS in the pesticide that was used to treat to treat mosquitoes because of the threat of triple E. So it does raise a lot of interesting from a regulator perspective questions of the risk balancing that we often do in the public sector for the risk of adding a chemical into the environment in order to minimize and mitigate other kinds of risks. The classic, of course, is chlorinating public water supplies, where you're adding chemicals in order to prevent bacterial infections, and it has worked very well. But adding the treatment chemicals comes with a minimal risk in and of themselves, but it's balanced by the greater benefits. And with this, particularly if you read the comments, and golden rule of the internet: never read the comments.
Right.
But as you go through it, there were in some way, some of the commenters were getting at that balancing and kind of trying to figure out or discuss kind of where that balance falls for something like this. Are the low levels of PFAS that are found here, wherever it came from, and that's a separate question, kind of worth the benefits of eliminating mosquitoes and hopefully eliminating cases of triple E, where a number of people, usually in low single digits, die of it every year. And then other people kind of look at that same balancing, not from the PFAS perspective, but for spraying pesticides in general and what that balance is. So it's from a risk communication standpoint, it is an interesting kind of taking the article and the comments together. So it's interesting reading as a professional looking at it.
What about household pesticides? Do those also have PFAS?
Well, so if you go into the article, the pesticides often they have the active ingredient and then a bunch of the inactive ingredients, and the inactive ingredients are often there A, to bulk it up, but B, to provide additional qualities that aid in the distribution of the material. This pesticide had been thought to be PFAS free, and you could imagine that given the kind of aggressively simplified, slippery qualities of PFAS, it might be useful to have that as part of the inactive ingredients in order to make it easier to spread and spray, going through narrow tubes and sprayers, that sort of thing. So you can see how it might be useful, but it had been formulated to avoid or eliminate PFAS compounds. The speculation is that the levels that are seen there may be introduced during the processing and packaging. Again, probably not surprising, but at least a certain possibility that you could find some low-level measurable levels as a result of that, not intentionally introduced into the product, but it ends up after it goes through various pipes and valves and bags and boxes and other things that may in fact themselves contain PFAS. So, home pesticides, again, it's a possibility. Again, and it's also important to remember that the longer chain pesticides, PFAS compounds that we are often concerned about have generally been are no longer manufactured in the United States, but it might depend upon where the product comes from. Other countries still use them, and they're probably more common in imported materials than they are in materials manufactured here. So it's hard to be risk-free in our lives, no matter how hard you try. So that's, and I would just say, this is, the latest in, a bunch of articles, both in the Globe and elsewhere of, oh, something was tested and we found PFAS. Earlier, there was, David Abel had written a similar article about PFAS in artificial turf. And across the country, I'm sure as people sample additional materials, they're probably going to find it. And it's important to keep in mind kind of how much is there, how much is really leading to exposure. The one, one particular line that I certainly would not have written in this article is comparing the concentrations in PFAS in the bulk material to the drinking water standard.
Right.
And because people aren't going to be drinking the bulk pesticide, the concentrated pesticide. And I think that it would have been more helpful to talk about the dilution a bit more and what the resulting concentrations might be in a reservoir, rather than comparing that to the standard, to bring it a little bit more optimal. Always important to keep in mind what the actual exposures are before making those risk comparisons. So I thought that was an interesting one this week. And then the other PFAS thing I wanted to bring to your attention, I'll go back to sharing the screen. And this we've talked about a bit. So this is our usual PFAS page on the DEP website. If you haven't bookmarked it yet, it'd probably be a good idea. You can find it by just searching MassDEP and PFAS, and it'll come up. And as we scroll down,
Paul, I don't think we can see any. I can't see anything on your screen.
You can.
Looks like it's still loading.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
Okay, I'm back. Let's try that again. And if this doesn't work, then just describe it. How's that?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Huh.
It says you've started sharing. It's probably loading.
Yeah, it could be a big enough file that it's going to take a while.
Well, it's just a web page. Well, we'll give it a second. The big news here, and I'll talk about it and we'll see if it loads, and if not, oh well, is that we have started the PFAS private well sampling work. letters went out November 30th, which almost sounds like a long time ago, but I guess it was just on Monday. So I am scrolling down the page that you can't see, particularly since I stopped sharing. And in, it was kind of buried under the laboratory testing and sample collection for drinking water, but I've also kind of copied some of it and put it in the section on PFAS and waste sites. So if you go to the PFAS and waste sites section, you'll find it. And I'll read this. The paragraph that I put in that section says, new private drinking water supply well testing program. MassDEP has initiated a state-funded program that will test a limited number of private drinking water supply wells focused on the 81 Massachusetts towns where 60% or more of the residents are served by private wells. An estimated 40 wells will be selected within each of the 81 towns based on priorities including geographic distribution throughout the town, proximity to potential sources of PFAS, and available funding. Should fewer than 20 of the selected well owners opt to participate in the program, other private well owners will be invited to apply and will be selected on a first come, first served basis. And then there are links to the letter that went out to local boards of health and others about the well testing program, and that has an FAQ attached to it. So I'm going to click on that and then try sharing this, because this letter also answers some of the questions that you guys have had before. How's that?
Nope, still starting to share.
This may be a problem with my having multiple Zoom meetings going on at the same time in my house, I guess. That maybe that's not working very well. Okay, let's see. Okay,
Paul,
so
have you clicked on the document after you start sharing? Did you then go and like click back on the thing you're trying to share?
I'll try doing that.
Sometimes that's what calls it up.
Okay, so now we're back at the main PFAS page. I'm going to click on the document. You're still not seeing anything?
Nope.
Yep.
Can you maybe put the link in the chat?
Yeah, let me. So here's the link to the. Make sure it goes to everyone. There's a link to the letter. So if you want to pull that up, the letter describes. So this is a letter from all of this is generally being run by the Drinking Water Program. They're doing most of the legwork. They're being assisted by a number of contractors, including particularly UMass, both UMass Amherst and UMass Lowell will be doing a lot of the legwork, reaching out to the local boards of health, municipal leaders, other interested parties. And one of the things we want to stress that if, in this initial contact, if the local boards of health say, look, we can't deal with this now because of COVID, then we'll say, great, we'll check back later and we'll move on to another town that may feel like they're in a better position to take this on. We're not trying to force this upon anybody during times when it might be otherwise complicated and difficult. But we're also looking at an end of the fiscal year deadline for spending money. So we do want to make sure that we get as many wells tested as we can doing this. UMass will be helping us do this. The 81, one question you guys had before was the 81 towns that would be the focus are listed in this in the Q&A. So you can see that. again, depending upon capacity, there may be opportunities for other towns or people in other towns to participate. That may be, we'll see how that goes. I would say if you know people or towns that have interest in having some private well testing supported by this, I would say contact the people that run the program. There are a lot of email addresses in here that they want to funnel all the emails to. So don't call me, email the people there and put it out there. It can't hurt to ask, particularly because at some point, we don't want the money to go to waste. And even though something might not be in these 81 focus towns, it might still be useful to have the information. And the point of this is to give us, the state, a better idea of the distribution of PFAS detections in groundwater across the state using drinking water wells as a way of getting to that description of the overall state of the groundwater in Massachusetts related to PFAS. This information will be paired with the information that we're getting from the public water supply testing programs. And the public water supplies include both the large public water supplies, the big municipal community wells, but also the smaller public water supplies that look more like private wells, the non-transient, non-community wells that might serve a municipal building or a condominium complex that look a lot like private wells, but are in fact, for regulatory purposes, public water supply wells. There's a Q&A that describes the program there. Leave it to you guys to read it. There's a link in that Q&A. And I've put it on the Waysite section of the PFAS page for a separate Q&A that tries to answer the questions of, okay, you're coming and you're going to sample my private well. Thank you for paying for that. What happens when you find contamination in the well? So there's discussion in both of the Q&As, but given who we are in the Wayside Cleanup Program, the questions will come up. Well, if I find 30 parts per trillion in my private well, let's start with the obvious one. Is it reportable? Do I now have, as a homeowner, do I have a notification obligation? And then going from there. So that the 21E specific Q&A tries to get at that, so that the homeowner who's thinking of opting into this program and volunteering will have a better idea of where they're coming from. And from the short answer to that question, in case you're wondering, is that, well, yes, it's notifiable, but we'll take care of the notification by signing on to it. You're authorizing us to make that notification for you. So we're not going to start a time clock after we hand you the results. We're not going to start the clock on notification for getting a notification back to us. So that will be taken care of. And then it does talk about potential liability and all of that. I think our expectation is that if we find elevated levels at most of these homeowner locations, they will more than likely be the downgradient recipients of some other contamination and not the source themselves. And we will kind of address them generally as having downgradient property status, and will not be bringing them in and setting up deadlines for assessment and cleanup of sites as a downgradient property. We do need to know the general distribution of PFAS in the state and what the potential sources might be in order to give us information to begin at some point in the future, once we have all of this information, kind of a more systematic assessment of these potential sources, identifying PRPs, and then at that point, kind of using the 21E program as well as other tools that MassDEP might have to address overall the more global issue of PFAS in the environment.
So Paul, the homeowner's still going to have to prepare a downgrading property status submittal?
No, we are, at this point, we're not going to be issuing notices of responsibility to a homeowner unless there's something that would indicate that there's a bigger problem in there, the PRP. So we're going to hold off on bringing those sites into the MCP by issuing an RTN or an NOR until we have a better idea statewide of what the issues might be. I mean, one of the issues that we still are trying to grapple with and using this to try to figure out is the extent to which PFAS in the environment may in some ways be similar to what we see with 1,4-dioxane. And the question of what is the potential role of septic systems as sources of PFAS, and if so, at what levels? What's the role of atmospheric deposition for PFAS, and if so, at what levels? We don't really know. So in cases where there are, it's the conditions and the locations and the concentrations indicate that there's something really big obvious going on, then we'll look for sources, we'll look for the PRP and kind of go from there. That's our overall approach. I would encourage you to take a look at kind of the written material, and somebody brought up risk communication before, related to the article. This, as you can imagine, the communication to the homeowners, and again, striking the balance of making sure that they, in signing up for this program, that they are giving informed consent. They have enough information about what might happen, under different conditions, without really scaring them too much, because what might happen is different from what probably will happen. I think most of these sites, most of these testings will come up with levels certainly less than 20 parts per trillion. There may be some, will likely be some that come up above 20. And for those, we want to give them a reasonable expectation of kind of what will happen. So take a look at it. It would be interesting to get your feedback on how well we did in striking that balance. And one measure of that will be how many people volunteer for the private well sampling after reading it.
So Paul, if you're above 20 parts per trillion, MassDEP may not issue an NOR, but it looks like, is what I'm hearing you saying, depending on whether you believe it's from an offsite source. But the letter that I was just skimming through here, the 21E letter, indicates that it is a 120-day notification condition and that DEP will automatically make the notification for you. So it sounds like it's still being reported.
So let me carefully parse that. Yes, you're right. If you, in looking at the statute and the regulations, the notification requirements, are pretty clear and black and white.
Correct.
So to make sure that we weren't putting a homeowner in any kind of potential legal gray area, what we're saying as they sign up, we're saying that this volunteering and agreeing to have your well tested, you're also agreeing to have DEP make the notification for you should there be a need to. So we're going to check off was notification made? Yes. Okay, the legal obligation to notify DEP has been made. DEP has a lot of flexibility, having been notified, on how we respond to those notifications. And I think all of you probably experience this one way or another over your careers, that not everybody associated with the site gets an NOR. And not all NORs go out immediately upon notification. There may be some flexibility in certainly the timing of the NOR and who we give the NOR to. Particularly where homeowners are concerned, if there are indications that they may not be the source, but there might be a source elsewhere, we would prefer to give the NOR and to bring the ultimate responsible party, the owner of the source, into the program, and recognizing that the homeowner has regulatory, more importantly, statutory protections as a downgraded property owner. So we're using, the more black and white part of it, the notification obligation, is being taken care of.
Hey, Paul,
With minimal kind of impact to the homeowner. Then DEP is using its flexibility in how we address that notification. You could look at it as putting it off until we have more information.
Paul, how is it not a 2-hour reporting condition requiring an IRA when you're exceeding GW1 in a private drinking water well?
Well, it checks both boxes, but again, once the notification is made, we get to kind of issue the NOR and decide what has to follow from that.
But why doesn't the homeowner have an IRA obligation? It's a 2-hour condition.
We're going to make that determination on a case-by-case basis. And one of the things as you go into that, we're going to be working with the homeowner on ways to mitigate and minimize their exposure, as we would with any situation. So again, take a look. Our comments would be welcome. Let's see.
Paul, these are not final.
These are final. They went out. Yep.
They did go out.
Yep.
Okay. And I apologize. I mean, I'm like everybody else here, sort of looking at them quickly. The thing that's interesting to me is it must be the Q&A or the FAQ, but number 10, what happens if PFAS is confirmed to be present in a private well? DEP and its UMass contractor can provide technical assistance on ways to reduce exposure to PFAS in drinking water, including the use of bottled water and installation of treatment systems. So I'm familiar with the fact that, on places where NORs have been sent out and sites are open, it triggers, as someone was just saying, the IRA requirement and the required provision of bottled water. Is there a risk information bulletin being provided here to tell people, whether you get an NOR or not, you're now exposed to something that in general we at the department have been thinking requires some mitigation?
Yes, first there's a lot of other information kind of in those
going with this in the mail to them or in the contract with them, so to speak.
So there, among other things, that number 10 bullet is in the more general FAQ out for that the drinking water program is putting out. The 21E specific is in the secondary, additional Q&A that goes with it. So the intent of this one is that if you find something, we'll work with you to mitigate it. The more 21E related information is in a separate one. There's also additional kind of health effect risk information in other fact sheets that are being made available to the homeowners as well. So if and when the results come back elevated, then the homeowner will have already been given links to the information. But if a particular homeowner comes back with an elevated reading, then they will be the focus of more specific intensive outreach by both UMass and DEP staff for that. So it will be very clear to them if they come back with a value of 25 parts per trillion, kind of what that means, what DEP thinks that means in terms of health risk and the need for taking actions to reduce or eliminate their exposure.
Appreciate that. I think the question would be, are they being told of the sort of the stuff that tumbles downhill if that detection comes in? And I get the intensive outreach after the detection, but it's more a matter of, I'll call it full disclosure.
Yeah, no.
Participate.
Yeah, no, those links and that information, I think as you go through this and the PFAS page, there's like right at the beginning of that Q&A, there's a link, MassDEP fact sheet PFAS in drinking water, questions and answers for consumers. So it gets, there are a bunch of fact sheets and handouts and information that they will have available to them before they even agree to the testing. So again, I agree. What we're trying to do is provide full disclosure about kind of the health, first and foremost about what the health risk might be, which is partly why they might want to sample their private wells in order to know their status. And then information about what it means from a program and regulatory perspective as well, so that they can, before they sign up, can evaluate that and decide whether they want to participate or not. So it's going to be interesting, a bit of an adventure starting from here through the end of the fiscal year, well, and longer, but to kind of see how this plays out. What we're finding, there have been other private well testing programs out there in other states and in Massachusetts. And it will certainly be interesting to see what we find here and the implications, whatever that is, on potential sources in the state that might have to be addressed. And whether PFAS is coming from septic systems or atmospheric deposition or other sources, point sources, more point sources, will result in different kinds of follow-up from DEP. So, lots of work. Yep.
So looking at the attachment, item 3 is your list of towns. So you're doing 40 wells from each of the 81 towns, or 40 wells total?
No, 40 wells from each of the towns.
Oh, so it's like 3,000 samples.
Yeah, we have the funding to do up to 3,000 samples.
And relative to your trying to evaluate sort of ambient conditions, atmospheric deposition, septic systems, are you going to have a questionnaire of sorts for each location to get a sense of what the setting is? Or you're just getting a sample? Looks like they're going to send a sampling package to the homeowner to mail back to them.
Yes.
How are you going to collect? How are you going to do that?
The initial study is going to be focused on simply getting the samples taken and the analytical results back. We had talked about having questionnaires, particularly among other things, getting to construction of the wells, but the feeling was that kind of the level of detail that the consumer, the homeowner might know about things that might interest us is probably pretty limited. And the goal was to make this as streamlined and easy for them as possible. So, we may, once we have results, we may follow up on, depending on what the results are, we'll dictate what the follow-ups will be, including, among other things, wells that do have more elevated levels of PFAS will be resampled immediately, and that will be a point, to find out more information about the setting and situation.
But it may be helpful to find out the setting even for the wells that
I-
come back clean.
I realize that, I know that, and it was part of the balance of how to kind of get the program up and running and working and as simple as possible. So,
Okay.
the researcher in me would say that, there would be a lot of other things, that data that we'd like to collect as part of this. But from a kind of program implementation point of view, and getting the primary purpose, which is to get an idea of what the concentrations are out there, it was decided to go as simple as possible.
Okay.
In terms of, there are the 81 towns, about 40 samples, is the goal, up to 40 per town. The thinking being that for any given town, it would be gridded out, and wells identified, in each quadrant, or each part of the grid, to make sure that we get spatial distribution across the town. And then in addition to that, trying to identify potential sources that might be in the town. And that's where working with the local boards of health and other community members would be helpful, so that we could bias some of those 40 samples. So a lot of the 40 samples would be randomly distributed, but organized on a grid pattern. And then some of those samples will be focused around private wells, around potential sources, so that we'll get a little bit of both information from that. The thinking is that 40 samples per town, some towns we might not be able to get as many people, and that's why they may be opening up to kind of more first come, first serve on a case-by-case basis, by town first, as a way of expanding opportunities to get people. We really don't know what the response is going to be, and how it's going to work out. There are some among us who think that, come March, we may not have as big a turnout as we were hoping for, and that we may be scrambling at that point to try to expand the sampling program as much as possible. Others, expect that people are going to be very excited and very eager to have the well sampled. You can make the argument both ways. So I'm really interested in seeing how it plays out.
Paul, are you going to try to collect well data in terms of, bedrock wells, depth of well, age of well?
Yeah, that's what Elliot was suggesting, that and more. And particularly that our experience with homeowners and their knowledge of the well construction, that is pretty bad. So that would be useful. But even when we do the kind of follow-up, if somebody comes back high and we do follow-up, my expectation that we get useful information out of that is not high.
Well, just something to consider is, in many of these towns, there's, a well driller in the area who has been drilling for 30 or 40 years, and they have a lot of data about, oh, I drilled that well and I drilled that
Yep.
well.
Well,
So-
I'm sorry,
Even something as simple maybe as, whether, I doubt there are very many, but, whether it's a dug well versus a shallow well versus a bedrock
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and as we go out and do the follow-up, for the ones that come up high, we can ask those questions. All I'm saying is my expectation for the quality of the answers is pretty minimal, but I think at that point we would be asking.
I'm sorry. I had
Well,
to
we
step away
also
from
have
it.
the well driller registration
Exactly.
that are done.
Yeah.
So we can look at the information that the department already has on those wells.
Right,
Right.
and we'll be working working with the boards of health, who will also be getting all the results as well. So
Isn't
When
it really obvious though at the surface, whether it's a dug well or a deep bedrock well?
There are going to be relatively few dug wells, I think.
I tend to agree, but it'd be interesting if there were.
They're going to have other problems.
Are they, at least when they input the data, going to assign GPS coordinates to the address so that it can be useful in GIS in the future?
So I'm going to split that question into two pieces. One, will they be doing that? Yes. Two, with the question you didn't ask, but I'm going to ask for you, will that information be available publicly? Which brings up the whole, the kind of broader, what is the public information part of this? So as you read through the letters, you'll see that initially what we're trying to do and what we'll be displaying on the PFAS website and kind of a mapped version of this is we're going to try to maintain a certain amount of anonymity for the casual viewer of this information. So people will have, based on the quadrants and the grids, will be indications of what parts of town wells have been sampled and what the results are. We obviously will have the more specific data in our files, and should things kind of move through the 21E process, you'll notice that in the 21E specific Q&A, we do go out of our way to say that if the location progresses to become a 21E site, and we bring it into the program, and there's assessment and cleanup that's required, whether it's the homeowner having to do it or some other PRP, that information will be available like all of our other 21E sites, on our file viewer, so that at some point, depending on what happens, the information would be available in a more, obviously explicit format. But the initial mapping that will be done to show the distribution across the state, it doesn't have to be a address by address location. We want to give enough information so that people get a clear idea of kind of if there are patterns, if there are parts of a town which have elevated PFAS levels, but it doesn't seem that we need to bring it to the individual homeowner address for that information to be conveyed. So again, striking a balance. Okay, well, PFAS all the time. It's going to be interesting seeing how this plays out. And we'll be getting a lot of good information out of it. And the program questions that will result from this will be interesting to tackle. Some of which the other program things with PFAS that are going on that I've mentioned before, the PFAS in residuals work is still going on. I know ORS had and the BWR folks had a meeting, I think in November, kind of on the technical aspects of leaching and loading and then leaching and that sort of thing. So they're they're having good discussions on that kind of the technical basis of that, and that work will be kind of moving ahead. I'm only tangentially involved in that, so I can't speak more to what their schedule is. But they have the goal of having some sort of more definitive regulatory scheme for how they're going to be looking at PFAS and residuals, sometime in the relatively near future. So that work will continue, and there are other things going on as well. Because everywhere you look, somebody is looking at PFAS and asking questions of what it means. Do you guys have any issues in the 5 minutes that you want to raise questions that we may be able to answer sometime in the future? Or any topics you want to hear about next week?
Any update on the revised regulations?
Same update we gave last week, which is we're still working on them. There aren't any major changes since changes in direction since we last gave a detailed update in March. It's just a matter of kind of moving it through the process, and certainly to a large extent me finding time to kind of go through and review the revisions. But we have high hopes, as we always do, that they'll be coming soon. Always the optimist.
Always the optimist.
So it's early 2021?
Yeah, as long as you don't
Not
try
this
to,
year.
as long
We're
as you
running
don't,
out of 2020 pretty fast.
yeah, definitely not this year.
Okay.
But the question of, let's see, I'm trying to get there we go. So always the optimist. The Latin underneath the MassDEP thing there is false hope springs eternal. Yeah. That's my motto. So definitely 2021. It's definitely still being worked on. Progress is being made.
It'll come out the same time as the vaccine, Elliot. Don't worry about it.
In fact, you sign up, you get a vaccine in the arm, and you get handed reg revisions.
Yeah. So the high risk people get the reg changes first. Is there any priority in distributing it?
Yeah.